We're going to be working on a very simple at first and then build up the complexity point and click adventure game. So there's a couple things we're going to need. First, go to Windows, Package Manager, and we're looking for Pro Builder down here. We want to go ahead and install that. My current version is up to date. We're going to be using that to build a very simple environment. Let's go ahead and go to Tools, Pro Builder, and then we're going to go to Pro Builder window. The next thing I'm going to do is just build a simple plane for my character to walk on. So clicking that on, you can see it defaulted and created a cube. I'm going to select that and I'm going to go to plane. I don't need this many width and height or width and length segments, so I'm just going to make those 0. And those are the subdivisions that go across. I'm okay with 10 and 10 for now. I'm going to go ahead and hit build. Now I want my pivot point to be in the center of my scene and I want to zero this out in my world. So I'm going to close this shape tool for a second. I'm going to go down here to center pivot and then I'm going to change the positioning to 0, 0, and 0. And now that's zeroed out in my world. Let's open up our shape tool one more time. This time I want a cube. I just want to set the height of my cube to 1.5. This is going to be the height of essentially my character for my game. I'm going to go ahead and hit build on that. With this, I want the pivot point to be just in the bottom of it, and it's already there. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and close this, and then do the same. You can also go here and hit reset, and it will reset all the values to center in your world. Now, the plane here, so for example, let's go and say we want to make it 5 times as big, right? So we have this massive environment. But I want to make sure that this is the new 1, 1, 1. These are all zeroed out. So I go down here and I click Freeze Transform, and now it's cleaned all those values. A couple other things. In order to get my character to move around this environment, what we're going to be using for our point and click is something called a Nav Mesh Agent. So here's my cube. Down at the bottom here, I'm going to go down to Add Component. Let's go ahead and close this console window. It's blocking me. And I'm going to go Nav Mesh Agent. And I'm also going to add a rigid body because I'm going to be wanting to use physics later. But at first, I'm just going to turn off Use Gravity. So here's our Nav Mesh Agent. I'll hit F to focus. Notice that my Nav Mesh Agent isn't fitting my my character. Let's actually just name this PC for player character. I don't have a name yet, but I will eventually. So with this selected, I'm going to go down here to Nav Mesh Agent. And you can see it has a radius and a height. I'm going to make the height 1. You can see it went down here. And then let's see if we can set this to actually let's see if we can. There's a second collider. Looks good. Let's make our base offset 0 so that it snaps here. And let's make sure our height, let's see, where's our height? Here, it's also set to 1. We actually want it to be the complete height because we're going to be using this for other things later. So we're going to have to kind of tweak these values a little bit here. And one other thing you notice is it's setting the Nav Mesh Agent center position to that corner. Let's go ahead and change that. So with my cube selected, I'm going to double click all the faces here. So I select all of it. And I'm just going to move my actual cube into the center of my Nav Mesh Agent like that, because I still want that pivot point on the bottom. So now when I go to object mode, notice that it's at the base of my cube. And my Nav Mesh Agent is centered there. And I think that's okay for now. I mean, I can increase the radius, but we're going to be replacing this with an actual character later. So there's our Nav Mesh Agent. I'm going to pull it a little bit off the floor, and I also want to make sure that it's set to humanoid, which is this right here. All right, let's save this scene here, and I'm going to go into my scenes folder, and I'm just going to call this test bed. And this is where I'm going to be saving all of my code as I'm working through like any of my point and click stuff or interactions with other characters. So let's go ahead and hit save here. Now, what I want to also do is make this cube here, this looks like I selected the floor and I made that. So let's go ahead and make this this ground. And let's make the cube here PC. There we go. That's a lot better. And I want to save off a prefab so I can use it in other levels of this cube. So let's hit F to focus. Now inside of my assets folder here, I'm going to create another folder. And I'm just going to call this one prefabs. And I'll generally put all of my prefabs in here. So with this PC selected, I'm going to make another folder in here called characters. And then within that characters folder, make one folder called PCs. And I'm going to drag my PC into this folder. And now you can see here I have a prefab for PC, and it has the rigid body, it has the Nav Mesh Agent, all that stuff added. All right, so the next thing we want to do is actually have our floor set up to have some navigation. So I'm going to go up to Window, go to AI here, and then turn on navigation. Now if I click Bake, what you'll see with the default options here is that it adds, let's make sure that our ground is actually set to static as well. There we go. Now when we go to Bake, you'll see this is the area in which my Nav Mesh Agent or my player can walk when I go to click on it. Well, let's say we want to have obstructions, right? So say I want, this is a street and I actually have maybe a bus terminal here or something for one part of my game. Well, let's go ahead and add a new shape that represents that, a gray box. I'm going to go ahead and hit Build. In the inspector, I'm going to mark this as static, and I'm going to move it into place off to the side here. I'm going to hit F to focus. Now with this selected, I'm just going to move this off to the side. I'm going to move this up. Just roughly something that I want to represent that bus station. Now, what I can do is reselect this, go back to my navigation, and hit Bake again. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at starting to write some code for this. So off to the side here, I'm going to go ahead and select my playable character. And on this inspector here, I'm going to go to the bottom and I'm going to hit Add Component. And I'm going to create a new script. Now there's a couple ways to do this. Actually, let's do it the sort of a traditional way. I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to Create Folder. And I'm going to name this Script. So these are my scripts. And inside this scripts folder, I'm going to create the point and click. So right click, create, C# script, and I'm just going to call this click and move. And then I'm going to double click and open this up. I'm going to pause the video and let this open. All right, so now that it's open, there's a couple things we need to pay attention to. Notice when I go to Window, there's a folder here called AI under Navigation. We need to add a library, the AI library, which is defined or created by Unity, and that has all of our AI stuff in there, like the Nav Mesh Agent. So with that added, now that gives us access to a bunch of different classes that we can use to move our character around. So for example, if we type in Nav Mesh here, you can see here's all these different elements. Well, we added a Nav Mesh Agent to our character, right? And we're adding this script to the character itself. And you can see that it gives us a couple suggestions up top here for what we can name it. I kind of like this mesh agent here. And then I'm just going to hit semicolon here. Now, because this script is going to be attached to our character, a playable character, we want to go ahead and get the component. So let's jump back into Unity to do that. So I'm going to select this, and notice we don't have the script attached. So I'm going to decompress these guys a little bit. And just so you can see this. Now if I grab this script, the click and move, and I drop it on here, it'll add the script. But since we made it a prefab, so I'm going to Control Z that, you want to click open here, and that brings us into the prefab of this PC that we created. I'm going to grab click and move, and I'm going to drop it in at this level here. Now what I want to get access to is this Nav Mesh Agent here. So to get this component, you simply write the following. So in here, I'm going to do Mesh Agent. This is the variable that we created up top. It's going to store a reference to, so we're going to say Mesh Agent equals get component. And then inside of these brackets here is we define what components, because we have a transform component, we have all these different components. We want to get that Nav Mesh agent component, which is that script. And we want to have access to all the cool stuff. So for example, when we're pointing and clicking from array to move it around, we're actually going to move our object through this Nav Mesh Agent. So let's go ahead and do that next. So I'm going to save this and let's go into our update code. Now we have to first create a Recast from our camera. So imagine that this is an invisible ray that's selecting everything in the scene that has collision on it. So the way that you do that, you just say ray, and then I'll use the default suggested variable there. Now, where we're storing this ray, we want it to be from the camera. So we're going to find the main camera in the scene here, and we're going to cast a ray from that to the ground. So anywhere we click, so screen point to ray, and we're going to get this from our input dot mouse position. So as we're moving around this ray on update, as we're moving it around, it's going to store the position of where our mouse is. It's going to cast the ray from the camera to the mouse. Now, anytime I click, anywhere I click, what I'd like to do is I'd like to store that as well. So we can do a ray cast hit, and I'll just use raycast hit, their variable here. And so this variable here I'm going to use in a second to cast the ray. So let's go ahead and comment some of this stuff. So this is where our ray is being projected. Created a variable to store where our ray is colliding with objects. Now what I want to do is I want to check when our player clicks the left mouse button. So I'm going to do if, and then a shortcut in Visual Studio is if you hit tab twice, it'll auto create the if statement for you. So if I do input dot get mouse button down, let's do that one more time so I don't have to type all that out. Get mouse. There we go. Third time's the charm. If input dot get mouse button down, and if I just do a 0 in here, that signifies the left mouse button. So if we press our left mouse, what I want to do is check where that ray. So let's comment that as well. If the player clicks the left mouse button, and if our ray collides with a collision object, so let's do that again. If tab tab, we're going to do physics dot ray, and this is where we're going to use the ray that we grabbed before. And then, so there's 3 parameters here. So if we highlight over this, you can see it's telling us cast the ray from the point of origin in the direction. And so that's this section. What is the direction we want to go in, and what's the length of it? So what we're doing is this is where we're starting our ray, right? It's from the screen point from the main camera to the input. The second parameter, if you remember here, it says the direction in which we want to go, and then the last one is the distance. Well, we're just going out hit. So we're going to create sort of a new variable here. And we're doing out, and then where we're raycasting out from. And then I'm just going to do, I don't know, like 200. Now this number I usually create a variable from, and this is the length of our raycast coming through. So if we click our left mouse button and we actually hit a collider, we want to do something. And what we want to do is move our character to the point on the plane that has the nav mesh on it. So what I'm going to do is just double click this mesh agent here. I'm going to say dot destination and equals hit dot, oh, recast hit, sorry, dot point. So anywhere I click, I should be able to move the character to that point. So let's save it. I'm going to jump back into Unity here. And I'm going to try this out. So we have the click, make sure click and move is on our character. And I'm going to set up my camera sort of a little bit more cinematically. So something like this, where I move it down. Actually, let's go this way. Maybe that's a little bit more interesting. And a trick with this too is if I click my global, it can go local, which is the direction the camera's going, and then global, and then it lets me move it back. And looks like we've got some weird rotation going on. Let's try that one more time. And then all I want to do here is turn that 180 degrees. There we go. And then let's rotate that down a little bit and move it forward. So now when I press play, I'm looking through my main camera down here. And if I click around, you can see it's moving in the direction of where I'm clicking and anywhere on the plane. So you can sort of have fun with this and decide, well, you know, I want it, you know, to be more cinematic. I'll select the character this way. Another thing is to get some lighting flushed in there. Let me go to Window, Rendering, Lighting Settings, and I'm just going to generate light map there. And then that'll flood my scene. That video went a little longer, but I wanted to kind of cover at least the basics of that. You can see there's our nice bake, and we get a little bit more lighting. It looks a little nicer. It's a little blown out, but we'll talk about lighting and post-processing another